Do you know why NASA faked the moon landing? It's because they were scared to lose in the space race to this Zambian man, Edward Festus Mukuka Nkoloso, after he unveiled his super rocket, the D. Kalu.
Yes, this is the rocket launching site, and my rocket is just here.
The most oh boy. Come on. Clearly I was joking, but that was the dream of one man who dared to challenge the United States of America and Russia on which country was going to be the first to put a man on the moon.
We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade.
So how did this freedom fighter envision a future of space travel in Africa?
We have been given the scientific knowledge, the technical ability,
and to become one of the most ambitious men in Zambia's history. So the question still remains, was this a real space project? Or was it a front in training the youths how to fight in the independence struggle of Zambia? This is that story in a space, in time. In the 1960s, at the height of the Cold War, the United States of America and the Soviet Union were committed for world supremacy, global domination, and the exploration of space and the unknown universe. On the 12th of April 1961, Russian cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first man in space. The Soviet Union had achieved the impossible and became the first nation to reach the heavens. And a few weeks later, on the 5th of May, the United States of America reached the same feat by sending astronaut Alan Shepard. The space race was on. And in the distant land, far, far away, in the newly independent country of Zambia, Edward Mukuka Nkoloso joined the two superpowers in the space race. In the news articles, he would make the bold statement to warn Russia and the United States of America and vow to beat them in the mission to put a man on the moon. Mukuka Nkoloso, a science teacher, founded the Zambian National Academy of Science, Space Research and Philosophy, which was Africa's first unofficial space program with its headquarters 11 kilometers away from the city of Lusaka. He recruited 12 astronauts who he trained. Nkoloso would coin the term Afronauts in referring to his space cadets. 21-year-old Godfrey Mwango had been tasked with the moon landing, seen here with Mukuka Nkoloso, who stated in the newspaper, "I will have my first Zambian astronaut on the moon by 1965. 16-year-old Martha Mwamba, known as Africa's first space girl, was tasked with the mission to land on Mars. In the companionship of two specially trained cats, Nkoloso suggested that the cats were primarily there as technological accessories. As he stated, when she arrives on Mars, she will open the door of the rocket and drop the cats on the ground. If they survive, she will then see that Mars is fit for human habitation. And on this long journey to Mars, she will be accompanied by a missionary who would preach the word of God to the Martians." And Nkoloso said he had warned the missionary not to force Christianity on the inhabitants of Mars if they did not want to practice, because Nkoloso was convinced that Mars was inhabited, as he wrote in the 1964 op-ed. "We have been studying the planets through our telescopes at our headquarters, and now certain Mars is populated by primitive natives." He stated positively, "Our rocket crew is ready." He named his rocket Cyclops 1 after his dog Cyclops, and the rocket D. Kalu was said to be named in honor of President Kenneth Kaunda. Mukuka Nkoloso, who was preparing his astronauts on the journey to space, was often seen wearing his standard issue combat helmet, a khaki military uniform with a flowing cape, with a multicolored silk velvet heliotrope, an embroidered neck fashioned with medals, and his astronauts wearing their green satin jackets and yellow trousers, determined to be the first to land on the moon. Some of the locals saw this as being too comical, or the astronauts were in a state of lunacy, but Mukuka Nkoloso was committed that his vision would be achieved. Our spacecraft, Cyclops 1, will soar into deep abysmal space, beyond the epicircles of the seventh heaven. Our posterity, the black scientists, will continue to explore the celestial infinity until we control the whole outer space. But when it came time to display his super rocket, the Cyclops 1 or the D-Kalu, it was simply a barrel.
Mr. Nkoloso, is this the site for your rocket launching program? And could you tell me where your rocket is?
Yes, this is the rocket launching site, and my rocket is just here.
And what is the name of your organization?
The name of my organization is National Academy of Science, Space Research and Astronautical Research.
And what position do you hold in the organization?
I'm the Director General of Science, Space Research and Philosophy.
His methods of space technology and training were laughable, as it comprised of making his space cadets jump up and down, clapping, rolling on the ground in a 40-gallon drum down a hill. This was so as to simulate the weightlessness conditions of the moon. The astronauts were swinging from one end of the rope, cutting it to produce the feeling of freefall, the space cadets floating in a drum by the nearby stream. His methods were seen as too primitive, as Mukuka Nkoloso wanted to launch his space shuttle with a catapult system on the 24th of October, 1964, during the new republic's first day independence celebration of the birth of Zambia. But the launch was denied permission due to being inappropriate.
And when will you fire off your first rocket, and where will you send it to?
I will fire it from Lusaka, and if we go straight to the moon, it depends upon how much money I got. If I got enough funds, it would be very soon, or in the middle of 1965, if I got enough funds. But if not, well, that will have to make me delay longer.
Mukuka Nkoloso would ask for funding of $20 million to $2 billion from Israel, Russia, United States of America, the United Arab Republic and UNESCO, but would only receive letters of encouragement and a 10-rupee note from a space-minded Indian schoolboy. He blamed the lack of funding on the imperialists, neo-colonialists, whom Mukuka Nkoloso insisted that they were scared of his Zambia space knowledge.
And what do you think the reaction of America and Russia will be to Zambians joining in the space race?
Oh, they'll be only surprised because they will find that we're just, they will underestimate our resources plus the intelligence, but I'm sure we are catching them.
But his dream of ever landing on the moon would come crumbling down. As he told the Associated Press in the August of 1965, my spacemen thought that they were film stars. They demanded payment. 2 of my best men went on a drinking spree a month ago and haven't been seen since. And another astronaut joined a local tribal dance group. Mukuka Nkoloso complained that they were not concentrated on the spaceflight, that there was too much love-making when they should have been studying the moon. And Martha Mwamba, the space girl, eventually got pregnant and dropped out of the space program.
Has President Kaunda given permission for your project? Has the Zambian government approved of it?
Not as yet, but they have taken interest in seeing what I'm doing, because this is a novelty, some things you in this country. Go up in the sky, jump up, 1, 2, forward, backward, jump, go up.
And so here at an abandoned farmhouse not far from Lusaka, we have a youthful group of budding astronauts playing at entering Zambia for the world's space race. However, to most Zambians, these people are just a bunch of crackpots, and from what I have seen today, I'm inclined to agree.
And after these words from the reporter, the world would make a mockery of Mukuka Nkoloso, even a mockery of Zambia, and a mockery of its people. That a British conservative and journalist wrote in his 1965 book, The New Unhappy Lords, used Mukuka Nkoloso as an example of the granting of full independence to the African nation in the 13th chapter, titled Lunatics at Play, page 92. The masquerade of the African in the guise of a politician able to take over the running of a modern state has nowhere been demonstrated in a more ludicrous light than in Zambia. What other country would, for example, boast of a minister of the heavens? Though the government of Zambia never proclaimed anyone as such, Mukuka Nkoloso self-proclaimed himself as one, the minister of the heavens, but he would be called by many names, by some of the locals, the amiable lunatic, a court jester, and the Zambian village idiot, and not many would call him a visionary, and the world would make a mockery of Mukuka Nkoloso. And in the July of 1969, the Americans would beat the astronauts in achieving the dream of landing on the lunar surface. the 20th of that July, Neil Armstrong became the first man to walk on the moon.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
And Mukuka Nkoloso's dream was over. But how did this dream begin? (1919), a child born in the northern province of Zambia, then known as the Northern Rhodesia. As a prince in the Bemba warrior tribe, Nkoloso received distinctive scars to his head as a tribal symbol. And the young Nkoloso's dream of touching the skies was said to be inspired by his first flight as a boy. Nkoloso taught the pilot to stop the plane so that he could walk on the clouds. He received a missionary education, also learning Latin, French, and theology. Nkoloso wanted to become a priest, but after the outbreak of the Second World War of 1939, he was drafted to fight for the British as a member of the Northern Rhodesian Regiment. After serving in Abyssinia and Burma, he was promoted through the ranks as a sergeant in the Signal Corps, a communication branch in the military. And under the tutelage of Mr. Montgomery, who taught Nkoloso how to operate a microscope, he developed an interest in science during the war. And after his return from the battlefield of war, Mukuka Nkoloso worked as a translator for the Northern Rhodesian administration. But his passion was to open his own school. The colonial administration denied to grant him the permission to do so, but Nkoloso went ahead and opened the school. He was later prosecuted and the school was shut down by the colonial authorities. Nkoloso was introduced to the writings of Karl Marx. This would also contribute in how he viewed governance. He advocated for a maternity clinic, a welfare hall, an industrial and technical college that would lead to equal pay for equal work. He also advocated for integrated schools, but that was seen as illogical as segregation was the norm of the time. And just like the many other African war veterans around the continent who suffered from unemployment, discovered that fighting for the Europeans did not grant them a better life back home. As Nkoloso joined the African ex-military men and wrote a letter to the editor in the Northern News, "We are entirely forgotten," writing on behalf of the veterans. Nkoloso drifted between secondary schools teaching Latin, science and mathematics, and it was at one of these schools where Nkoloso got into an altercation with a British educational officer who argued whether Africans had the right to take a lunch break. While Nkoloso was eating, angered by these sentiments, he overturned the table and pointed out that the white man was infringing on his human rights. He then led his entire school to a protest, marching to the education office, and was later fired. Nkoloso found a job working as a salesman for a pharmaceutical company, Lever Brothers. He would go on to join the Ndola Urban Advisory Council on the Copper Belt, as he continued with his activism and spoke against the raising of the native tax, pointing out that the colonial federation protected the interest of the white people while Africans remained as workers and laborers. Rallying the people of the province against colonial rule, this would gain him a reputation as a political agitator on the Copper Belt. Storming into the district commissioner's office to protest against the European foreman exhuming African graves, Nkoloso was later caught up in a sweeping arrest of trade unionists. And after his release, he was designated a restricted person and sent back to his home district of Luwingu. And it was here where his popularity gained him more attention, as his stance against colonialism garnered him more followers in the district. And Nkoloso was appointed the district president of the ANC, which was the first political party in the country, formed in 1948. Nkoloso was the freedom fighter who was always seen wearing his blood-red robe with his long dreadlocks that was said to be emblems in the memory of all those who had been slain under colonial rule. His followers would compare him to John the Baptist, Elijah, and even Jesus Christ, known as the man who doesn't cut off his hair. Mukuka Nkoloso, a former seminary student, would even perform a baptism and would hand the newly reformed follower a party card in 1957. He had organized a large-scale civil disobedience campaign against the colonial administration and the rural chiefs, who are now seen as collaborators of colonialism. He urged the native people of the land to refuse to work as carriers, food servers, and laborers, and that they should ignore any orders to cultivate the fields. And a summon was issued for Mukuka Nkoloso's arrest, but he disappeared into the bushes and a 6-day manhunt was carried out. Nkoloso was said to have finally surrendered and walked towards the officers, straightened his arms forward, ready to be handcuffed. But his supporters interfered and a riot broke out, and Nkoloso would again flee into the bushes, but was later captured in the wetlands of the province. Nkoloso claimed that the officers grabbed him by the neck, dragged him to the river with the intention to drown him. They shaved off his head, beat him with sticks, and tortured him as Nkoloso collapsed. The reports would reach Kenneth Kaunda and a rebellion would occur in the village. Many would point out that it was at this moment when Nkoloso started to change, as they said that the beatings affected him mentally. Nkoloso became a member of the newfound political party called the United National Independence Party, UNIP, which was formed in 1959, and Nkoloso became the party's national steward. He would rally the crowd before Kenneth Kaunda and the other leaders of UNIP would address the masses during the campaigning for Zambia's independence. And it was in the early 1960s when he founded his academy for the space project. He started recruiting his space cadets as astronauts from the local schools. Nkoloso said that he did not only train the astronauts for space travel, but also secretly preparing the youths in the fight for independence, because he wanted to keep the young astronauts very active during the colonial struggle for the freedom of the nation, as this goal was hidden from the British colonial government. He claimed that the two astronauts, Godfrey Mwango and Martha Mwamba, had traveled to Tanzania to learn about political propaganda that was to be used during the Chachacha uprising. And some of the astronauts were taught how to make petrol bombs for burning bridges, cars, and buildings. And in 1964, the country had finally gained its independence, and the native Zambians were now free from colonialism. And Mukuka Nkoloso participated in the Constitution Convention. Nkoloso also advocated the proposal to support witch doctors and claimed that there should be a place besides physicians, and that herbal practices should serve as a substitute for Western medicine, that African medical practices were disrupted by the coming of Christianity, though Nkoloso stated that he himself did not practice witchcraft. And President Kenneth Kaunda appointed him as a special representative at the African Liberation Center, which was there to help other Africans fight for their own independence in their respective countries. This was a safe house and a propaganda machine for freedom fighters of other colonized nations of Africa like Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Angola, South Africa, and Namibia. Nkoloso was to give military training to the guerrilla fighters in Chunga, near the headquarters of the Zambia National Academy of Science, Space Research and Philosophy. He was called Mr. Independence by the Sunday People's publication in 1971, as he was quoted, "When someone calls me a freedom fighter, I tremble with pride. I'd rather be known as a freedom fighter than a cabinet minister." Nkoloso also had dreams of being the mayor of Lusaka, as he said. He would tear down the city and build a space-age city in the capital. He believed in his vision for the galaxy, as he was quoted to have said, "I see the Zambia of the future as a space-age Zambia, more advanced than Russia or America." Nkoloso was seen as a madman for taking his space program serious, but leaders of the liberation movement revered Nkoloso for his contribution towards the independence struggle and respected him as a freedom fighter, and the young were inspired by his passion. Nkoloso was said to be a well-rounded man who would go on to obtain his law degree at the University of Zambia in 1983, in his 60s. He was awarded the Russian Jubilee Medal, 40 Years of Victory, in the Great Patriotic War from 1941 to 1945. He was also made an honorary Army Colonel. Edward Festus Mukuka Nkoloso died on the 4th of March 1989 and was buried with presidential honors. His funeral was attended by President Kenneth Kaunda and freedom fighter Samuel Nujoma, who later became the first president of Namibia in 1990. This is the legacy of Mukuka Nkoloso. The man who dreamt of going to the moon has inspired cinema, like the 2014 short film called Astronauts. He also inspired a series of surreal photographic recreations of the space program by Christina de Mido. Mukuka Nkoloso has inspired fashion and now known as one of the pioneers of Afrofusion. Nkoloso appears as a character in the book The Old Drift by Namwali Sapel. I know to most Zambians this seems like a joke, and of course it's funny, but it also underlines the problem with us as a people. We laugh at those who dream about achieving the impossible for the greater good of the country. Man has wondered about the galaxy and has always wanted to live a life among the stars. And the first people who proposed reaching the heavens using technology were also ridiculed. Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, a Russian high school mathematics teacher, the man who came up with what is now known as the rocket equation, was criticized that his work was impractical but would still inspire generations. The first people to go to space, you guessed it, the Russians. So in the case of Mukuka Nkoloso, it might be the dare to achieve the impossible. Yes, the science and the mathematics was wrong, but as a nation, there is no continuation in ambition. Do we lack the fulfillment of a collective goal for the future as a country? So yes, the science and the mathematics was wrong, but we, the so-called educated people of the future, are the ones to reverse that error in the objective goal to reach the stars. And if we continue to laugh at the ones who dream about going to the moon, as a country, deep down we will know that we will never know what space really feels like.
What is the name of your organization?
The name of my organization is National Academy of Science, Space Research and Astronautical Research.
And what position do you hold in the organization?
I am the Director General of Science, Space Research and Philosophy.